Okay. Thank you very much to the Northeast Renewable Energy Coalition for bringing together all of the events today and this week here in Connecticut. My name is Mike DiDonato. I work at UConn Tech Park. I'm the business development manager for the Tech Park. And our goal at the Tech Park is to connect industry to researchers and research capabilities to try and push forward state of the art. And one of our major initiatives is surrounding sustainability. So it makes sense to have today's events hosted here and to be a proud sponsor of this event, these events this week. So thank you very much to our panelists who have taken time. This is a massive panel, 7 people strong, a few more and we would have a soccer team, but we'll do what we can. I'd like to start just by giving you each a moment to introduce yourself and your company. There's a lot of really cool expertise here. The topic is about building Connecticut's clean energy future. And that's a very broad topic. So we need a lot of minds and people working to help that out. So why don't we go right across from left to right with an introduction on each of you. Steve, would you like to start?
Sure, thanks. Stephan Hartmann, Earthlight Technologies. I'll be quick because there's actually 2 of us here from Earthlight about the company, but I head up the commercial sales efforts, so energy storage, commercial scale solar, energy efficiency. We have a service department. We also self-perform all of that work. So engineering, design, project management, and installation. So full turnkey operations. And we have the residential capacity as well, which I'll let you on.
Good morning. My name is Sean Riel. I'm the director of sales operations here at Earthlight, or at Earthlight. I work very closely on the policy side, looking through dockets proposed through the Public Utility Regulatory Authority on current programs for residential solar, commercial solar, and battery storage deployments.
And you guys are right here in Connecticut.
That is correct.
Awesome. Ellington, is that right?
That is correct.
Awesome. Peter?
Good morning. My name is Pete Londa. I'm CEO of a company called Tantalus Systems. We focus on helping electric utilities modernize every aspect of the distribution grid from the substation down to the electric meter at the residential, commercial, and industrial level. And then behind the meter is we see the proliferation of inverters and storage from cool things like what you guys do. We support 325 utilities, predominantly in the United States, and also have an office here in Connecticut.
Awesome. Thank you very much for being here. Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Smith. I'm CEO and president of Infinity Fuel Cell and Hydrogen. And much like our name says, we're involved in designing, building, testing, and delivering fuel cell systems, but also electrolysis systems. And electrolysis systems are technologies that allow you to take water and electricity made by renewables to make clean hydrogen and clean oxygen. And our focus is really somewhat different than many other companies here today in that over the years we have been primarily working with NASA and the Department of Defense in developing these technologies for these extreme applications in space and underwater. And what we're looking to do with these technologies is bring them back down to Earth to benefit terrestrial applications. Because if you can provide a means to utilize sunlight or wind or geothermal energy to make clean hydrogen with no carbon dioxide involved, it can become a source for energy storage, but it also can become a very important feedstock for many different industries throughout the world. So that's what we're primarily involved in. And I went to University of Connecticut. My background is in physics, graduated from UConn, but also UConn has been very instrumental in helping us in some of our very initial projects where we partnered with the UConn Fuel Cell Center, as I think it was called at the time, and that launched some of the very first things that we did that continue to this day. So looking forward to today's panel.
Love it. And I love having some more UConn representation here. So happy you're here for that. That Fuel Cell Center is now our Center for Clean Energy Engineering. And we're seeing some of the diversity of technologies already that's represented in this panel. Tom?
Thank you for having me. I'm also a UConn grad, so great to be back on campus here and seeing all the innovative initiatives on campus since graduation. So again, my name is Thomas. I'm a principal with Salas Orion. We're a full-service engineering consulting firm, about 4,000 employees in North America, and including about 100 in our office just north of Hartford, Connecticut. We are a provider in relates to this type of service for many institutions, including UConn, where we're helping them decarbonize their campus grids. And so UConn is an example where we're in the process right now of constructing a new South Chiller Plant addition that involves geothermal assets, and that's something that is a specialty of our firm across the country, having designed and overseen installations of thousands of bore fields across the country. So it's something that the technology is improving on, and we'll talk about a little bit more today.
Love it. Thank you so much. Kevin. Oh, wait, just share mics here.
Still on? Hi, I'm Kevin. I'm here representing a company called ThayerMahan. We're about 250 people, headquartered out of Groton, Connecticut. And what we do in the defense world is provide surveillance or security anywhere in the world for things that are on or under the ocean. We found that when offshore wind started coming to Connecticut, that those same skills were very applicable and activated the same sort of folks to provide all of the support that's needed for construction of offshore monopiles and substations, and then all of the stuff that's support services that are required to put down offshore cables and to maintain them. So a little bit different than other folks here, but really leveraging those defense knowledge, skill, and ability pieces to be able to enable construction here in the United States for offshore wind. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you.
By the way, thank you for having me. My name's Kane. I'm the CEO of Thryve. We represent a national group of solar dealerships across the United States. We focus mainly on bringing innovative products to those businesses and to homeowners, including support services, unique products. We're coming up with new products even this week for a launch, so be interested to talk about that today on the panel. But yeah, it's basically we're trying to reinvent somewhat of the solar business, and so far it's working in the chaos of shrinking industry. It seems this year with the new administration, we're actually growing. So
that's really encouraging to hear that there's growth. So when I was thinking a little bit about what we want to talk about as a panel and what we're trying to convey, we have some very significant goals in the state. Trying to get clean energy by 2040 is a big one. And when you think about clean energy, you can think about the user side, you can think about the commercial versus the residential user. You can also think about, we just went through a ton of different technologies, geothermal, solar, wind, all of the electrical components. And so the other way to think about this is also, the life cycle of energy, from its production to its transmission and its distribution. And then also beyond that, there's the challenges associated with balancing that, trying to think about the system as a whole. So in that light, I thought it might be smart to start where the energy starts and to start a little bit with the production and generation side, where energy comes from and how that's changing away from the world of coal to a very new future that we really have to invest in and be careful about as we think about, especially to reach the goals of no carbon in Connecticut by 2040 and goals like that. So I'll start with fuel cells and Bill, as with additive fuel cells and hydrogen, you talk about electrolysis, you talk about fuel cells, and the technology is still growing. But hydrogen is seen is more and more seen as a part of that future for our energy needs. Can you talk a little bit about what role you see fuel cells playing here in the state, and what needs to happen for better adoption? And before I let you start, I'll say before this, I was chatting briefly with Kevin, and he commented on something which I really liked, which is, let's think about this, about what makes Connecticut unique, what makes our energy system unique. And if we can highlight those and talk about those to really bring this home and say, here in Connecticut, let's talk about how all these technologies are going to fit together in this challenging puzzle. So with that long preamble, I'll let you take it.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the goal of becoming carbon-free by 2040, and that's a very, very ambitious goal. But in order to do that, you have to look at not just the provision of electricity throughout the state, but then everything else, transportation, manufacturing, and so on. I think that's an area where electrolysis and fuel cells can provide a very unique perspective. And I have to say, one of the very first programs I was ever involved in was when I started working on a program at United Technologies with NASA, and they were looking at doing power systems in space. And so I saw how we could use photovoltaics, use sunlight, photovoltaics, make electricity, and break down water into hydrogen and oxygen, store the hydrogen and oxygen for power, for stored energy, and then convert it back to electrical power in the reverse reaction. In the process, you take this sunlight resource and you make a clean, absolutely carbon-free fuel with no pollution of any kind. And for NASA too, there's an added benefit. The fuel cell reaction, you can drink the water, so that's an added benefit. And I see that for a state like Connecticut, where you're trying to decarbonize not just the electric grid, but basically transportation and other industries, and that's where hydrogen can provide a very critical role. You can use renewable power, whether it's offshore wind or solar or even geothermal, to electrolyze water and make the hydrogen, feed the hydrogen into the transportation infrastructure to decarbonize mobility, and feed it into the industrial side of things to decarbonize that. And there's many industries in Connecticut that use hydrogen every day that's made by reforming natural gas, and that creates carbon dioxide. Further, in larger industries, which really aren't in this state as much, but for manufacturing ammonia and fertilizer and concrete and steel, globally, that Connecticut can help decarbonize other parts of the world by creating those technologies right here. And our company is involved in developing electrolyzers that can do that, and Hyaxium as well. And there's another company that I was a co-founder of, Proton Energy Systems, is now NEL Hydrogen in Wallingford, making all kinds of electrolyzers for that purpose. So that's how I see hydrogen and fuel cells can provide a pathway to that decarbonization goal. Sorry, it's a long.
No, I love that. I love that. And you mentioned a number of Connecticut companies that are involved in fuel cell. And I know here at UConn we have a strong fuel cell research team. Do we as Connecticut, the state, do we have a disproportionate number of fuel cell companies when you look nationally? And if so, why?
We do. We've been called the Silicon Valley of fuel cells.
I love that.
Here. And the reason for that, it goes way back to the space program in the 1960s and 70s, where between Massachusetts and Connecticut, fuel cells were initially applied to spaceflight. The Gemini program was the first use of fuel cells in space, and then Apollo, and then the space shuttle, and so on. So that created the core technology for this area. And then further, at United Technologies, electrolysis was developed to be used aboard nuclear submarines, which are made right here in Connecticut, to provide life support oxygen. So today, all U.S. and allied submarines, the life support oxygen is made by electrolysis on those subs using systems that are made right here in Connecticut.
Beautiful. So we have a unique capability here of being able to prove out something for the broader nation, that fuel cells work, that hydrogen works as a potential solution for some of our energy challenges.
Right, and one thing I'd add is that if you look at where Connecticut is between New York and Boston, we're kind of a transportation center. A lot of people are coming through here that will buy energy along the way. So we have another opportunity there.
Awesome, love it. Thank you so much, Bill. Let's move and talk a little bit about offshore wind as another, sticking to the production and generation side of where our energy comes from. Kevin, do you want to tell us a little bit about where we are right now and where some of the opportunities are, and again, how we in Connecticut can approach this in a unique way?
Well, there's lots in that question.
You have 90 seconds.
And why don't I start out by tell a little bit of a story. So the company that I work for, ThayerMahan, was started because of the defense industry here. And the problem was that there was way too much ocean and there aren't enough submarines, and they cost a lot to make, and they cost a lot to repair, and they cost a lot to staff and train. And boy, if you could take autonomous vehicles and you could do part of that job, just the surveillance part of that job, well, then you could do a lot. And that's what my company was doing. And we were sitting at a panel very much like this at UConn Avery Point, and sitting next to someone representing Ørsted. And after the panel, where we thought, boy, they're big, we're small, they turned to us and said, hey, if you can find a submarine, can you detect a whale? And that's what kind of started us into the clean energy future and connecting Connecticut technology to that greater future for the tri-state and larger region. So from those beginnings, we went out and we put technology in place that could detect and classify as a North Atlantic right whale and localize these critically endangered species. We could do it in real time, and we could provide that information to the construction facilities so that they could stop work if there were whales around. And that worked so well that then we got another question, and it said, hey, you're working well with regulators like NOAA and BOEM. Can you talk with them, and can we try to put together a package where, well, see, there are these speed zones that are out offshore, and if there are whales there in that particular time of the year, they put a speed zone in place and say, don't go past 10 knots in your ship. That way it won't hurt whales if you happen to bump into one. Well, we put systems out there, and we were able to tell our customer, and they could have their ships slow down if whales were present, but they could go fast when the whales were not present. Worked perfectly out of Port of New Bedford for offshore wind. What we learned from that, as we continue to learn and move forward, was that the velocity of the port and the content that you wanted to move through a port could increase by putting sensors further and further offshore. So now we have a technology that was developed for defense here in Connecticut that we've expanded out and tested offshore with offshore developers for renewable energy that protects the whales. And now we could apply it to Connecticut ports, Rhode Island ports, Massachusetts ports, wherever they are, to use the same infrastructure and make more cargo go through it faster. So I think it's a fantastic thing that we're able to take these technologies, that we're able to build them out, and we're able to not only work towards a sustainable future, but weave that into an economic and politically appetizing future as well.
I love that. So that you kind of said two things that I want to kind of think about more broadly as well. One was that you mentioned the whales, and I see that as also a hurdle to clean energy that your average person is not necessarily going to think about. They're going to be like, offshore wind, go, put them in. And there are hurdles that have to be cleared. And that's a great example of one that we have to think about, we have to plan through. And also that the solution comes, one, it comes with data, it comes with technology, and that the data and technology can have other applications as well and help other parts of our economy, broader than just, when I turn my coffee machine on, I know that it's coming from a sustainable source.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So that when you bring the data to the problem and you look for the right solution, you start to find that things that you thought were the problem or were the right factors to consider, maybe were not. Right? So when you look at vessel strikes in whales, perhaps it wasn't the offshore wind vessels after all. Perhaps it was other vessels that were moving very fast that were killing the whales in the whale strikes. Data-driven conclusion. And what do you do with that? Well, now if you have endangered rice whales down in the Gulf of Mexico, and there are only a couple hundred of them, offshore renewable wind has developed a solution set that now can be placed into the broader energy market and can help them with offshore construction so that they don't have the same problem with North Atlantic right whales transferred into the Gulf of Mexico where they have a rice whale problem. So I just think that the development that happened here in Connecticut and the application of it well beyond is going to continue to bring back jobs and manufacturing knowledge to Connecticut for years and years to go forward.
That's a great statement. Great. Thank you very much for those stories and that information. Sticking with production and generation, I want to talk about solar. We have Earthlight here. Kane, we got you here. You know that you do solar as well. Let's think about that hurdle, those challenges, those unknown challenges. Maybe starting with Earthlight, what are the biggest misconceptions that you see with at both the commercial front, the industry front, and the residential front in regards to adopting solar? And how does the real world of solar differ from our expected results from solar?
Misconceptions. It's actually very affordable, especially when you look at what it brings to the table over its full lifespan, right? So if you think beyond 5 years, 10 years, and we talk about clean energy futures, you got to be thinking well into the future. So capital expenditures are certainly a way to go about it, but you can also leverage those benefits, right? So there's a lot of bankable returns that can be leveraged into creative financing. So financing was probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest innovations that our industry saw over the last 10, 15 years is the availability of traditional lending and saying these returns are going to materialize. This is a bankable investment. You can make a business decision and make a slight pivot and find yourself being cleaner and more efficient with your business.
You meant say business decision. Is the same thing true on the residential side?
Absolutely. There's been a phenomenal proliferation of different financing options available to homeowners to consider solar and battery storage over several years now. Not everyone is able to leverage the federal tax credit for going solar. And so for those people, and with particular emphasis towards folks who might be, low income, who still are looking for savings on their electric bill, but might not be able to monetize the traditional benefits of solar in that way. That's where advances in leasing products, power purchase agreements, and those types of products have really helped to bring equity to the field. So, solar isn't just for the rich. And in fact, it's really there to make a level playing field for folks of various socioeconomic backgrounds.
I had a question to specifically ask that exact one, so thank you for bringing it up. Kane, you mentioned that Thryve Home is growing, despite some of the loss or threat of loss of incentives that are coming. So can you talk a little bit about that, and pulling kind of off Sean's comments of the high income versus the low income, creating equity in solar. What are your thoughts on that? What have you seen?
Sure. No, I think they hit the nail on the head. Sean's comment. The reason why we've grown so tremendously this year is because we actually design these financial products, right? To a great extent. We actually have something that's coming out shortly that is not a loan, not a cash, not a PPA, not a lease, which is totally unique to the market, we think, in the next few days. So, we're constantly trying to innovate in different ways with supply chain agreements, with distribution and so forth that make it a lot more feasible for the local residential and commercial installers like Sean's team. So it really has come a long way from the Wild West days of the original solar market, where you had people that were doing tree removal or electricians or whatever that had to try to figure it out, but now it's become far more advanced and much more affordable than it used to be. I would say one of the things that is probably also very troubling, or actually puts a lot more pressure on the financial side, is obviously interest rates, right? And supply chain issues with tariffs and so forth. There are a lot of new requirements for domestic content. That's probably getting into the weeds a little bit, but basically almost all of our energy comes from China in some ways in the solar market. And anytime you buy a panel from China, you're actually importing energy, basically, right? And so we're starting to realize that on the political side and taking action by raising these content requirements for different incentives. And most of the manufacturing that has come back to the United States in the past 5 years has actually been from solar, believe it or not. In fact, most of the new energy production in the United States over the last few years has been solar, right? And wind too, I should say, but largely solar. And that's because it's probably the scalability, the efficiencies have just gone really, really way up compared to where it used to be. But I totally agree that really the financing aspect of these, solar projects, battery projects, probably the same for a lot of the industries that are up here. They're long-term views, and anytime that you have to deal with, interest rates of twice of what they were, or 3 times even of what they were, a few years ago, that really changes the dynamics of everything. So you have to be very creative.
I'm glad you brought up the finance part of this. And, I arranged this conversation from kind of following the path of the life of energy. I probably could have designed a much better panel if we talked about where's the money, who's got the money, where's the money going. But that's it. The innovation on the finance side is just as critical. I'll pass this just to general to the solar experienced panelists. What makes Connecticut unique? Is there something that makes our state uniquely set up to succeed here? We'll say not only from the energy production standpoint, but from the solar innovation standpoint. What sets us apart? What could set us apart?
I could speak to this from the residential side. 2 key advances. One of them is within the last 2 years. That for homeowners who were looking at going solar 3, 4, 5 years ago, they may have gone through the process, getting permits, getting engineering, up until the point that they find out that the transformer on their street needs to be upgraded. And the cost could range at that time anywhere from, say, $2,000 to $20-something thousand. And the messaging to the customer would be, well, here's the cost, pay it or don't. We don't particularly care one way or the other. Thanks to one of the recent decisions made by PURA in the last couple of years, there's actually now a framework by which homeowners participating in the Residential Renewable Energy Solutions Program, or RRES, are actually paying into a program that directly subsidizes the cost of transformer upgrades. So it's not ratepayer based. It's actually being paid for directly by other homeowners going solar. So that has removed a significant roadblock. And it's come from the second key advance, which I'd say is active engagement with our regulatory framework. That unlike other states in which solar installers may operate, Connecticut actually operates in an annual review cycle for a lot of these programs to find out what's changing on a macro level, federal tax credits, cost of equipment, cost of labor, and we'll make changes to the programs to align with RPS frameworks and goals towards hitting our ambitious carbon framework goals for 2040. So it's actually a fairly nuanced program that Connecticut has unveiled through its regulatory framework. And so companies, stakeholders, individuals are all free to participate in it.
It sounds, anything that's nuanced is hopefully well thought out. And it sounds like at least there's been some thought that's been put into this. And moving forward, hopefully we can continue to kind of invest the brain capital at the onset to design systems that will encourage and promote the use of new technologies in that type of manner. So that's clever. Any other comments on something that makes Connecticut unique on the solar side of things?
Yeah, I could tell you maybe from, we're national, so it's a little different from my perspective than the local perspective that Earthlight's team is commenting on. But I can tell you that one of the unique things that I see in the Northeast is there's a big brain trust. Connecticut, definitely very much so. You can tell from the panel, obviously, that that's a big part. And the energy needs are probably going to be far easier for Connecticut to meet than some of the states that are lagging in the solar, sphere, I would say. A lot of people don't see the connection between energy availability, production, and so forth. East to use, it's very quick to get a solar production project up and running compared to a nuclear power plant or even a gas-powered plant or anything else like that. So I think that Connecticut has definitely been thinking ahead on some of that, especially the transformer comment. It's a huge problem. It's called the interconnection process. And a lot of other states that are just not really thinking of the nuances that you mentioned, they unintentionally are just missing the ball basically because they have some legislation that gets them, benefits and permits and so forth. But if they can't install it at the end of the day, or if there's an expectation that, well, maybe an installation company like Earthlight goes all the way through all the permits and everything, and at the very last second, they say, I'm sorry, the utility company told us that it's going to be $20,000 more, right? I mean, it's just a horrendous cost that is unnecessary. If there was a little more transparency, it would really make it easier for businesses to operate, and Connecticut is way ahead of the game on that.
I don't know if anybody here knows, or anybody out here, how Connecticut stands from the standpoint of adoption on solar, geothermal, battery backup. How do we rank amongst our peers? Anyone know the numbers?
I wouldn't know the specific numbers, but I would say we're lagging on a per capita basis. There's other states that have certainly invested more dollars. But I'd say despite that reality, a strength that Connecticut has is that it had a more sustainable growth. So for example, the ZREC program rolled out in 2011, 2012. It was pretty innovative in the fact that it provided a stable renewable energy certificate purchase program for 15 years. Whereas we had learned from the New Jersey market, you could pay $700 a rec and everybody would go nuts for a little while and you get a lot of solar, but then that rec would crash. It created a lot of instability. Massachusetts with the SMART program filling up in days or weeks when it was intended to last for years. So one of the things that Connecticut has made a core tenet of its policy design is to create sustainable, continued growth of the industry. So we might be lagging behind, but I can tell you that folks who have gone solar or taken these, adopted this technology in Connecticut, they're not regretting it. They're not feeling like, oh, I missed the boat or I should have waited. Generally, those who have done it in the past are happy they did it in the past, and those who are signing on now are wishing they had done it sooner. So Connecticut has created that environment, which is just a perfect launch pad for growth to get caught up in the long.
Great, thank you for that contribution. Slow and steady and robust. Hopefully that's good. The question 2040 is looming, and it will slow and steady be fast. Good enough, I guess.
There definitely are headwinds, and to the comment earlier, we are a small group of people. We are heavily engaged in policy, and fortunately, the review process is very open, and there's a lot of opportunity for the industry to comment and for the public to do so.
Thank you. Wonderful. All right, so transitioning a little bit more towards the transmission and distribution side. I thought, Tom, maybe we could start a little bit by talking about Salas O'Brien. As an engineering firm that's working across different sectors and trying to clear hurdles of various types. What are the biggest barriers that you're encountering that you see on a regular basis that allows people to bring clean energy projects to fruition?
Great question. So we're coming to this from a different angle, not necessarily creating the sources of energy for here, but trying to transform the built environments to be able to accept some of that clean energy. A lot of that is to electrify buildings, where traditionally buildings, particularly on the heating and cooling side, have been heated through fossil fuel burning equipment like gas-fired boilers and even coal in some places. We're trying to introduce electric technologies like heat pumps in particular that can provide more opportunities for clean energy to be utilized at these buildings. And so we have, commercial, public and private sectors have amazing amount of existing building stock. And that is a big hurdle to try to get existing buildings to be able to utilize some of this new technology in a more efficient way. So a lot of the barriers to adoption of these technologies is, what does it mean to our building? What does it mean to our building operations? And we often go through these decarbonization planning sessions at a campus scale or even at a building scale to understand what these impacts are for each individual client or customer. And it could mean as simple as a little bit of work in their mechanical room to switch over some equipment, or it could be pretty invasive going out to each individual space within the building. And then you have to think about how to phase that type of construction and installation process to be able to utilize. So once folks get educated on that and understand that, I think it becomes a clearer path forward. But there is just still uncertainty about what does it mean to me individually as a building owner or a portfolio owner. And I think education about that process, education about the available technologies, the schedule, and even some budgeting part of it helps, because there's a lot of push and pulls happening on clients. There are carrots like incentives available that may be sunsetting, maybe not, if people are looking to take advantage of, particularly in the geothermal aspect of it. And then there's also the sticks. There are policies being changed. You're seeing it in City of Boston, City of Cambridge, where they're not allowing fossil fuel equipment to be installed in the future. So you have to think about that proactively, because construction cycle takes a long time. There's design, there's construction, there's permitting processes. You have to think pretty far into the future to plan accordingly to minimize interruption to the process.
That's interesting, and it I think prompts the question of what are the motivations that any adopter is considering, whether these are financial economic benefits to themselves, whether those are triggered by what you're commenting on, about some of these incentives or restrictions of the municipality or higher level. What about a value-driven motivation? Are you seeing adoption of these technologies driven by just an individual's interest in pushing sustainability broadly? Or I say individual, and I don't mean to push this more on the residential side, but also on the corporate side. Where do you think that falls in comparison to the economic benefit? Are people making decisions on their wallets? Are people making decisions on their hearts?
Great question. I think it varies based on the consumer and who their client is. In case of higher education, student body, faculty, staff, they're very interested in sustainability. They want to hear about what the campus is doing to reduce greenhouse gases. And there is value there beyond just the utility bill savings, but to attract students, to attract faculty, to attract research to an institution. There's value there that showing these type of initiatives can really help drive. But at the core of it, on the other end, there is the sort of developer world, right? That again is looking for a shorter payback to things. And so there is, the incentives that have to help along that process. Right now, it's still in certain areas cheaper to burn fossil fuels than to utilize electricity. And so just a swap with the same coefficient of performance does not necessarily translate to the dollar. So there are other added benefits that we try to stress beyond monetary for those type of customers that may also be in restricted areas in order to have to comply to be able to do what they're.
That's helpful. Any other comments on, yes, we have some social pressure, how that social pressure is being used and where you're seeing the scales of social pressure versus cash?
We certainly get the inquiries, and businesses are willing to invest time and energy into learning because of the pressure from their ESG goals on the corporate level or wherever it might be coming from. The decision is usually made, with the pocketbook, at the end of the day. But we're glad that at least that initial phone call and that exploration and resources are being assigned this task as a priority within organizations to hear it out and to understand how it's going to go, because that's very costly for these businesses to dive into. Is how does this technology work? What does this do? Solar is now matured to a point where I think it's generally understood it's going to work. But when there's a comprehensive approach that includes energy storage or other energy efficiency projects, building controls, suddenly it can get a little heady. And there's a lot of time and energy that goes into that. And a lot of the programs are designed around comprehensiveness. So to get that time and to get that sincere review is very valuable, and it does result in more projects because they do make financial sense.
Kane, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I was gonna say something a little, not at all piggybacking, right? That was a good comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was gonna say, nowadays, it's not just about, that's very true about the battery storage component especially. That's going to be a very big part of, how we proceed in the future, because you're gonna see people, basically drawing in energy through, their solar projects, probably through some of the other energy projects that are being talked about here, wind, for example, and stored in a battery, whether it's at a homeowner's house or at a major facility that is, owned by utility or government or whatever, and released at peak hours. The other part to it too is, I think I mentioned earlier about domestic manufacturing is becoming a huge, rewrite of the American economy, I think, more recently. You don't see as much importation of all of these components from Asia anymore, and you're going to see that trend change dramatically on the battery side, especially very soon. Right now, whether you have an EV or a battery component or anything like that, largely we're at the mercy of China on that right now, which is a very, I would say, I'm not a national security person or anything like that, but that's definitely I would say an extreme concern, economically. And I think everybody is waking up to that now, and they're putting the pedal to the metal full throttle. And as we are developing these ourselves, we are also kind of, I would say, designing them for our types of systems, not the same type of way that you would see maybe for the Asian version that suits their economy in particular. So I think it's a very exciting time on that end.
Awesome, thank you. Peter, let's talk about Tantalus systems. It seems to me that you fall a little bit more on the distribution side of the equation. Is that correct?
Correct.
And so all these complexities that we just laid out are going to kind of hit you in one way or another. Can you talk a little bit about some of the challenges of managing the complexity, and what are some of the strategies that can be leveraged to make sure we are taking advantage of all the opportunities, but at the same time building a foundation that we can truly build upon?
So as you think about the context of wind, offshore, onshore, solar, commercial, residential, other forms of power being generated at a distributed level, all of it has to come together in the form of the electric grid today. Unless there is a vision at some point in time that will far exceed any of our lifetimes of every home being its own microgrid, absent the 1/10 of 1% of the population in the United States that can afford that. And so when you think of all of the advancements that are being made nationwide and here at the state level, it gets very complex when the electric utility is the one at the end of the day that has to deliver power to the masses. You can look no further to Spain and Portugal, just a few weeks ago of countrywide outage. And when you think about countrywide outage, I can personalize that. My wife happened to be in Portugal on that day, scheduled to fly back to New York. There's no airport, there's no planes, there's no ticketing system, there's no ATM system to get cash, there's no credit card system, there's no place to check into a hotel. There's no Uber because everything's down. And so when you think about the advent of what unfolded there, while we have terrific aspirations here in the state of Connecticut of going carbon neutral to carbon zero, the grid is built on inertia. The grid is designed for central sources of generation to be delivered down to those that are in the most needs of our communities here in Connecticut and in the United States. When you eliminate inertia, big turbines, and you rely on variable sources of power, you get something called voltage dysregulation. And so where does that manifest itself? There are aspects depending on the types of technologies that fellow panelists here are talking about in large scale versus down to the residential level or the distribution grid level. Utilities have to focus on managing voltage regulation as a result of variable sources of renewable power from the transmission side and then at the distribution side. What we do at Tantalus is focus exclusively on helping electric utilities automate every aspect of the distribution grid. And so a couple of examples that have already been shared here today. The process to get rooftop solar installed. At the residential level, planning, I tried to go through it twice with one of the competitors here to the right, and on both occasions it was nix. But when you think about the complexities of putting rooftop solar and storage and an EV at a home, again, I'll personalize. I drove up from the friendly confines of Fairfield County today in my F-150 Lightning. And when I charge that vehicle at the side of my house, I double the amount of power that my house consumes. The transformer that was referenced earlier was deployed in 1988. On our block, every house has doubled in size since 1988. 3 of our 7 houses on that transformer have an EV. The electric utility responsible for delivering power that we all need to power our cars. And I like to joke, keep the internet up so that my 18-year-old daughter has access to social media. Right? That's really what I'm trying to solve in terms of problems from a technical perspective is how do you fortify a device from 1988 that is increased in cost and that is increased in terms of access to the So when we think about the distribution and the integration of all these things, you have to have controls at the very edge of the grid. You have to have power quality sampling at the very edge of the grid through intelligent devices, and that's one of our core competencies. And then you have to take all that data, the changes in current, the changes in voltage, how that impacts harmonics, how that impacts things like waveform, cascading impact to the infrastructure. A couple of fun stats that we like to throw out. There's an unquantified number of transformers in the United States. Best guess is in the 50 million range of distribution transformers. The average life expectancy of transformers, distribution transformers, is about 40 years. 60% of all the transformers in the United States today exceed 40 years. So that means we rely on the most critical asset in the distribution grid, and it's already beyond expected life. And now we're throwing these things at it, all with great intention, and with great advancement. Solar, storage, EVs. Those assets are going to stress that. So that's what we're focused on is how do we help the utility understand, and we're doing that here in Connecticut. To your question, the regulators here, PURA, came up with the Innovative Energy Solutions Program. It's to help United Illuminating and Eversource, 2 large IOUs here in the state, start to play with technology, sensors, data analytics, leveraging machine learning to pinpoint at my home, something's changed. Transformers start to stress based on power quality sensing that we can do at the very edge of the grid. What do we do about that proactively to protect that transformer? to make sure that we can offset costs associated with the implementation of rooftop solar.
That's encouraging, and it kind of leads back to some of the comments of data earlier as well, and how much data could be helping us here, and how we need a lot more data to do this in a strategic way that isn't just dumping billions of dollars into fixing everything right away, but let's do it in a way that's manageable.
Yeah, so we talk a lot about the utility going from, and it's a function of everybody on the panel today, more often not device-centric approaches, a solar panel, a wind turbine, a fuel cell, right? Fill in the blank, a storage device. Utility similarly, substation equipment, transformer, meter, power line. Like, the only way this all comes together is by shifting the paradigm from being device-centric to data-centric. And so we're helping utilities go from, even in this state, we have 5 utilities, we still see some utilities that are reading meters manually. Think about that in today's world. What industry in our society does anything manual today? Other than, I guess in theory, some plumbing. But I mean, at the
When we can get remote plumbing, we're going to be in a really good spot.
100%, now you're talking, right? And or remote smart switch on our hot water heater so that when it starts to leak, we don't end up with a leak at the house, right? Now you're talking, but it's how do we take a utility that's used to 1 data point a month, manually picked up for purposes of generating a bill, and now turning them into a data-centric organization that is capturing 1 million data points before they have the first cup of coffee. And it is the combination of accessing and then ultimately leveraging that data to pinpoint asset protection.
Do you feel momentum in that direction?
Yeah, so I'd say similarly, you know, I don't know if we necessarily fall in the landscape of clean energy. We fall in the landscape of grid modernization, which is required in order to support the integration of renewable energy. We've been very fortunate in terms of growth of both number of utilities. The urgency is as high now as we've ever seen, and you know, utilities. A lot of people say move slowly. I like to say deliberately, because they're risk averse. But we are seeing a level of urgency from utilities to protect assets and protect their workforce, as we all spend money on solar storage, EVs, et cetera. And then we're seeing an increased number of use cases just based on the broader macroeconomic environment that's unfolding. So for sure, we see a lot of acceleration.
Thank you. I'd like to ask, I think, maybe 2 questions, and we'll let each of you, give you each a moment to talk about it. One would be, again, we've got these big goals. We have a lot of problems, a lot of unique hurdles, and we need to think about them generally. And each of your industries is facing its own critical priorities. So I think my first question would be, what do you think is the top priority that Connecticut needs to address right now in order to make sure we hit that 2040 goal? There's a lot of small things we could do right now that may not move the needle much. In your industry, what is the biggest hurdle that we need to address? What's the biggest gap? And then maybe a forward-looking thought of just where do you see us in the future? Peter, you just described a concerning landscape of our electrical grid, but also a direction forward and kind of saying, hey, we need more data to correct this. We need to identify, be able to have a more proactive system, a more responsive system. Kevin, you were talking on the wind side of things of looking at the whole picture in a different light. And that's a really exciting kind of direction. So moving forward in 2040, let's say we do it. Let's say we get the zero carbon goal. Where do you see the state of Connecticut, specifically in your area of expertise? So again, what's the biggest priority right now for Connecticut, and where do you see us? What is the golden future that we should really be targeting? Peter, do you want to go first?
Sure, I'll be the guinea pig on that one. So the The biggest area of focus, in my opinion, is changing the behavior pattern of utilities. Changing the behavior pattern of utilities ties to the rate structure here in the state of Connecticut. We've got a Millstone nuclear power plant contract that runs through, I think it's 2029. And as that starts to dissipate or gets restructured, I think a comprehensive view of the rates that and the rate structure on how utilities can prioritize investment at the distribution grid level in particular. This can't just be about generation and transmission, which is the sexy stuff that typically has gotten a lot of the money here in the state. It's got to be about changing the rate structure to allow utilities to upgrade substations and activate intelligent edge devices across the grid to have a much better view to prioritize investment.
Love that. And where do you see, what is the golden future in your world?
In the state of
Perfect data all the time.
One single source of the truth.
Okay.
For utilities, and based on that, the lowest cost, highest reliable power, not only to the residents here in the state, myself included, but to the businesses to drive economic development.
Great, thank you. Tom, do you want to talk about what priority is on your side and what is your golden future?
Sure, happy to take that on. So I think there's still sort of momentum building around the use of ground source heat pump or geothermal in as an energy, not necessarily a source, but technology to deploy to help decarbonize multi-building portfolios. And there's a little bit of let's see if it works. Where else is this happening? Is this happening in my climate with my conditions? And there are some pioneers out there. We're transforming Smith College right now. They luckily have a big endowment and able to take on a major initiative like this, and are starting already having plants up and operational, and we're able to get some data and show that to others that this works. And they're doing a great job publicizing it and doing tours of their facilities. So we bring in a lot of other customers and clients to go see what that looks like, and that those early adopters now are gaining some momentum on that. So the education part of it, the getting that impetus to start up is great. On the future side of this, in the sort of 2040, we're really excited about community geothermal. This is another pilot program that is out there right now. We're working with the city of Framingham with Eversource to network a mix of single-family homes, commercial buildings, all through a hot water network. That instead of supplying gas to each building, they're able to share energy. And I think that's really part of the kind of holy grail of performance, is to be able to not necessarily have to produce heat or cooling at the building, but is to able to share it among buildings. Because right now it's evaporated the atmosphere, cooling towers, or inefficient equipment. So how can we share energy? And through these community geothermal projects that we're seeing right now spur up to see, does the economics work? You might see some larger scale adoption of that.
That's cool. That's thinking kind of about energy at every resolution, from the personal, the household, the community, the municipality, the state beyond. That's an exciting area to think about. Kane, do you want to go?
Sure. Oddly enough, I think I can piggyback on that one. So, I mean, very much in the same principle of geothermal, which I'm well aware of the community, sharing of resources and infrastructure definitely sound very exciting in geothermal. Similarly, in the solar and battery market, I am very bullish on the concept of microgrids, which I think will also play into the grid connection challenges that were discussed and the monitoring issues that were discussed earlier. I think what you'll see more and more in the future is that every house has a battery, every house has solar, and every single one of these houses is a mini battery plant. And each of these battery plants can be remotely controlled to save energy or export energy at any given moment, in which case if you understand how the energy markets work, trading and so forth, you'll find that the cost of electricity for a lot of these energy transactions really just, they're incredibly spiked at peak moments. You would think almost to an absurd level if you were, a layman really of it. And I don't pretend to be an expert on everything here, just to be clear. But I think that actually will further incentivize even the common person to have, actually a battery size system that actually may even go beyond what they need, because the incentive is suddenly there. If you've got a lot of solar on your roof, you're not only producing for yourself, you're producing for your whole community. And this can obviously extend to schools, government buildings, commercial enterprises, a lot more than what it is today. So, and again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but as we move further and further towards this, if you think about how a long-term gas power plant works or coal power plant works, it's a large fixed cost. And as people kind of deploy their own little mini power plants, right, those utilities either have to find a way to, I guess, downsize, which is very difficult, really, or raise their prices to make sure that their fixed costs are met, which only compounds the transition to this microgrid sort of future, I think. So, there's other things too to this, obviously, which is that, we have enormous power needs in 2040. We're going to all use EVs, maybe flying cars, who knows? But AI data centers, et cetera, those are enormous. I mean, I'm not a Bitcoin guy, but they use a ton of energy. So there's a lot of different things out there that we are just using. We're electrifying, the economy way, way more than it's ever been. And there's no way to keep up with it unless we're reinventing all of this stuff. And I think, all of us will have a certain part in that energy mix. But I'm quite, enthusiastic about how Connecticut may very well be well positioned for that as well.
That's encouraging to hear. And I'll give a shout out to UConn's Eversource Energy Center research team, which is based out of this building, which has a lot of microgrid modeling capabilities. Kudos to great researchers. Sean, Stephan, what are your thoughts on top priorities that we need to look at right now and where we're going?
Well, I think I'm going to piggyback off Kane's point here in talking about battery storage. I think we've seen since the state deliberated SB4 and some of the implications that will arise for solar deployment in the future. I think that battery storage is going to be an important consideration for the value proposition for folks who are looking at doing solar for their homes. So removing some of the roadblocks that currently exist for battery storage is going to be crucially important as incentives for battery storage decrease, and just as the need for battery storage increases overall too. One of those that we run into fairly frequently on the residential side is brought up by building and fire code, where there are specific locations that you are precluded from installing battery storage. So if you have a home that's an old Victorian with a lot of windows here, there, and everywhere, there are not a lot of places for you to add battery storage. So homeowners can conceivably miss out on that benefit. And those codes are currently written with an eye towards and a thought towards the older nickel, manganese, cobalt battery technologies that are out there, instead of the lithium iron phosphate and some of the newer technologies that are emerging that are much safer chemistries with which to work. So as upfront incentives for battery storage are starting to decrease, it's really important to remove those roadblocks. Otherwise, homeowners are going to be spending thousands of dollars additional for even as the equipment itself decreases in price, they're going to be spending that much more money to sheetrock a room, install all the necessary fireproofing for something that might be redundant or unnecessary for the batteries that are in the market today.
That's really interesting. I like the idea of the future architectural designs having a utility room that looks very different from how it does now. Perhaps all with the south-facing roof somehow. We'll figure that one out too. Any other want to add to that, Stephan?
Yeah, I'm gonna add another shout out to the data. We don't have smart meters on most of the commercial buildings in Connecticut. We know how much energy is being used at the end of the month because they're going out reading the meters. We're seeing what their peak needs are, but we're not seeing sub-hourly data. It's there, we can collect it. I think there needs to be a requirement, an obligation for the utility to collect this information. I do think, Peter, to your point, I think it has been deliberate that the utilities have allowed their transformers to go well beyond their expected usable life. Because if you update that technology, it comes with new insights that enables the end user to curb their behavior for their own betterment. And then if you're using less energy, suddenly new generation, it's less on the back of that technology to solve everybody's problem. I love energy storage. I'm actually focused on that as a part of our commercial division at Earthlight. But every time we talk to a building owner, they're curious about this. I know what it's capable of doing. The data's not there. Well, we have to put a monitor on your building for 6 months and learn about what you're doing, what's going on. We have to audit this model, but we don't actually know your operation. So we're already starting from well behind the starting line. So that data would really help us out. Just a quick anecdote, like this makes me think of, the mile per gallons gauge on your car. What happens when you tell a driver what their mile per gallon is when they're driving? Suddenly everybody becomes a hypermiler. Suddenly you gamified it, and suddenly you're saving on on gasoline, and all you've had to do is be informed, right? So that data is going to do a lot, but it's also going to help companies like Earthlight and our 162 employees that are out there in 100-degree heat on black asphalt roads getting this stuff done. It's going to help us feel more secure that we have the data to work with. We can add more value to the customer and say, here is what you are doing, and here's the technology that can help you. Here's a way to finance it so that you can make this a business savvy move. Oh, and by the way, it helps the environment. It helps us with our clean energy goals. So data is a great way to go. Consistency of programs just help make sure that the jobs are there and the training for those folks so that people understand that job is going to be there when they get out of school. Great.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about workforce development, but that's obviously a big piece of this as well. Kevin, any thoughts from you on priorities right now that we should be addressing and where the future will bring us?
Yeah, I think nearly 150 years ago, to when people figured out that if you controlled the plains of Europe, you controlled the economy and sustainability and energy in Europe. And if you controlled the waterways, you controlled the oceans of the world, you were then able to apply that performance and that sustainability to the whole globe. I think one of the takeaways from that piece of history and that piece of strategy was that coastal environments, coastal nation states had an advantage. And I hope that Connecticut will take the time to really think about what Connecticut's advantage is and how Connecticut wants to move forward with our partner states in the new blue economy. Because there is performance that happens out there, whether it's trade between nations, whether it's generation of power, it's been talked about in nodes today, whether it's the cables that transport power or transport information on the seabed, all of that is absolutely critical to the future. And Connecticut has to define its role in that. I think the way forward, as a lot of people here do, is through technology and data. That allows you to make the right trade-offs between performance, between trade, and between sustainability. So my objective, my hope in the future would be simply to digitalize the ocean. And once you do that, now you can manage those trade-offs globally. And you can do it in a way that betters not only Connecticut, but Connecticut's global future.
Fantastic, thank you. Bill, started with you, we'll conclude with you. What are the biggest priorities for you for Connecticut on the hydrogen side?
Well, I guess to take us home, I'll start with transportation. If we're talking about decarbonizing the state, decarbonizing what goes on here, you have to look at mobility in the state and mobility of what that means to us here. It means cars, buses, trucks, even airplanes, and even ships. How do you fuel them? And in the near term, I think what is really vitally needed is policies and policy support, financial support. In the last administration, there was a big push for hydrogen hubs throughout the country to make hydrogen a reality and be available in a cost-effective way. A very cost-effective hydrogen produced by renewable sources, produced by wind and solar and so on. And that's really coming to a stop right now. So if that could happen, it'd be good to re-energize that. But we'll get beyond that. These times will change, and there'll be a new administration, new goals, and a new push toward a cleaner future. So to get to that kind of a carbon-free 2040, that's really a short time frame for these kind of industries. But I can see what's a vision where vehicles, including buses and trucks and even aircraft, become more electric. A fuel cell powered vehicle is an electric vehicle, and typically they're hybridized with batteries. So it isn't like a question of batteries or fuel cells; they work together. But if you make the hydrogen by renewable means, then you have a clean, carbon-free fuel to use in whatever menu you choose. Whether you use it in a fuel cell or use it to provide primary power or backup power or whatever, and also to decarbonize industries that use hydrogen as a chemical feedstock. So all of those things will work toward that carbon-free 2040 goal. But near-term funding and policy, again, resurrect that, and then longer-term, just addressing all of those markets in parallel. And that is being done in different parts of the world, irrespective of what's going on in this country. In fact, one of the very largest solar-powered electrolyzers in the entire world is being built in Saudi Arabia as part of their NEOM project, because they have that vision to decarbonize, believe it or not, their country. So we can do it too.
We can absolutely do it. So thank you all. This has been really fascinating to see a wide variety of technology experts and professionals talking about your fields, describing both the challenges that you face and the opportunity that presents itself to the state of Connecticut and to businesses within the clean energy sector. So huge thanks to you all. Thank you very much to NREC for participating and bringing us all together today. Thank you for coming, and please enjoy the rest of the NREC week.
Thank you guys so much.